Yeah, I'll react to that, sure. Jesus.
A shocking
Warfront's great channel, preemptive like. My name's Connor if you're new. Hey guys, the original link to the video from Warfront's top of the description if you want to watch on your own. Go right ahead. India and Pakistan on the brink of war. I feel like this is the... excuse me. I've seen some videos I really like. I think it's a yearly thing. I could be wrong. It could happen more often than that. But Pakistan and India on a part of their border have this kind of ceremonial march and dance they do together, and they like shake hands. And I feel like this is one of the most nonchalant relationships that aren't necessarily friendly, but nonchalant nuclear, the most nonchalant nuclear enemies. Does that make sense? I don't even know. Clearly, I know that they have a large history together. I mean, they were once part of one nation, and then during the British, or when the British left, there was a separation between Hindu and Muslim citizens in the Indian subcontinent that created the countries of India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan. But the Pakistani-Indian relationship is very interesting.
terror attack against Hindu tourists. Right now, two nuclear-armed nations stand at the precipice of an all-out war. Following a shocking terror attack against Hindu tourists in the disputed region of Kashmir, the bitter South Asian rivals, India and Pakistan, have leapt at each other's throats, exchanging fire, cutting off a critical water supply, and moving military assets in a way that suggests large-scale violence may be imminent. India appears to be building a pretext to strike Pakistan directly. Pakistan is making clear that it will defend itself at any cost, and attempts by the entire rest of the world to bring a stop to the crisis have failed. The fragile peace between India and Pakistan, it is crumbling as we speak. So here's what we all are going to need to know in advance of whatever comes next. Now, before we begin, we've got to issue a key caveat here. Everything that we discuss in today's episode is up to date as of sunrise, Monday the 28th of April in New Delhi and Islamabad. Anything that's happened since that time will not be accounted for in this episode, and in this case, that is especially important to bear in mind. Look, judging by the pace of escalation on both sides going on right now, it's not safe to assume that this conflict will remain in a phase of preparation and build up for any length of time.
The whole... since America's disastrous failure pullout of Afghanistan. Am I being too harsh there? I'm American. I can... but that region of India, for one, but Pakistan, southern Afghanistan, and Iran. Like eastern Iran, western Pakistan, and southern Afghanistan. It's a very... interesting area I don't know much about, but I know enough about it to know it's interesting, in that there just seems to be some ethnic groups that really cross each of those borders. And then you have India and Pakistan. It's just an area of the world that I'm finding more and more interesting.
So
is what I'm trying to say.
Conflict will remain in a phase of preparation and build up for any length of time. So do rest assured that if war has already broken out by the time you see this, then we already have an update coming. Now, the current crisis in India and Pakistan began about a week ago on the 22nd of April in a meadow called the Baitaran Valley, a few kilometers away from the resort town of Pahalgam. Now, that town is located in the Himalayan mountains in a region known as Jammu and Kashmir that's been the focus of a dispute between India and Pakistan for nearly a century.
Oh, and then you have the disputed territory between India and China and Pakistan in northern India, northern Pakistan, and far western China. So this whole South Central Asian area is just very confusing, and for that reason fascinating. So I was pausing off.
Himalayan
Sorry.
mountains in a region known as Jammu and Kashmir that's been the focus of a dispute between India and Pakistan for nearly a century. Now, for the sake of time, we'll leave an explanation on the history of this conflict for another episode, but suffice it to say that for now, while India and Pakistan have agreed to split the region along a mutually accepted line of control, it's remained the site of both ongoing insurgencies and bitter geopolitical rivalry between the two nations. Pahalgam is in the Indian-controlled part of Kashmir, and despite the conflict in the region, Pahalgam itself has been a safe, popular tourist destination in a place where fighting is typically kept well away from tourist areas. But on April the 22nd, the tranquility of Pahalgam was shattered when 5 armed gunmen attacked a large group of tourists in the nearby Barsaran Valley. Wielding assault rifles and wearing military-style fatigues, the gunmen snuck through the sparse local security and began to interrogate the tourists they encountered. Muslims were separated out. First, if they could recite a verse of Islamic prayer, and then they asked the other men to show whether they were circumcised, a common practice in the Muslim world. Hindu men who did not pass the 2 tests were then executed at close range, while women and children present at the scene were spared. 26 people were executed in the attack, including 24 Hindus, a Christian, and a local Muslim man who had tried to intervene. 20 others were wounded, and the insurgents escaped, at least for a while. Credit for the attack was claimed publicly by a group called the Resistance Front, or TRF, a recently established organization that first became active in 2019. They're an offshoot, a subsidiary by some accounts, and a splinter group by others from a well-established Pakistan-based jihadist insurgent group called Lashkar-e-Taiba. This is an organization with a long history of attacks on India, including the days-long siege of the city of Mumbai in 2008, when over 160 people were killed and Westerners were hunted down. Like the Resistance Front, Lashkar-e-Taiba's primary objective is to break India's control over Kashmir, thus allowing it to be annexed by Pakistan. The Resistance Front is somewhat less overtly religious in its messaging and is prominent on social media for recruiting purposes, but in terms of its overall goals, it and Lashkar-e-Taiba are on fundamentally the same page. Now, critically, India accuses Pakistan of directly supporting the groups, fomenting attacks, granting them safe harbor, and benefiting from their violent work to advance Pakistan's long-held objectives. Now, from the moment that news of the Pahalgam massacre began to spread across the globe, it was clear that the geopolitical implications could be major. As if to confirm those suspicions, India immediately accused Pakistan of being behind the attack, citing digital evidence and intelligence intercepts that implicated Pakistani operatives in a supporting role. India is yet to produce conclusive evidence for the world to see, but that did not stop a first round of reprisal measures against Pakistan from coming within just a day's time. India
Seems like a problem of any conflict, whether it be personal, a group, or even countries, is that when you have long-standing giant disagreements is too soft of a word. I'll use it because I can't think of anything. Long-standing big disagreements between countries, and then a blatant attack is carried out that might not be directed by one country, but calling that attack out could weaken your greater narrative against the country that was attacked. Then it's like a web of like you can even say this for like political parties in a one country where something happens on behalf of one political party that is really bad, but is not directed by a political party, and the other side says call it out. But then the other side thinks calling that out weakens their overall narrative, even if they had nothing to do with it, right? I think this is a natural thing that happens. It's not good, but it seems like it's kind of par for the course, you know.
Pakistan from coming within just a day's time. India announced 5 retaliatory steps in total, including the closure of the primary border crossing that links India and Pakistan, the expulsion of Pakistani diplomats, a travel ban on all Pakistani nationals to India, and an order for Pakistani visa holders to leave India immediately. India formally downgraded its ties with Pakistan and issued information on 3 suspects, 2 of whom it claims to be Pakistani. Now, the most important retaliatory measure, by far, was the suspension of a critical agreement called the Indus Waters Treaty, a compact first signed in 1960 to establish control and sharing arrangements over the waters of the Indus River and several other important rivers. Up until now, the treaty has never been suspended despite multiple violent conflicts, and has been hailed as one of the most successful water sharing arrangements worldwide. Importantly, the water of the Indus River and other governed water sources flows from India into Pakistan, giving India practical leverage over the rivers if it ever chooses to take action. Pakistan has long regarded the potential
It reminds me of like the Ethiopia-Egyptian conflict over the Upper Nile.
suspension of the rivers if it ever chooses to take action. Pakistan has long regarded the potential suspension of the treaty as a major national security threat, both because India could withhold water from Pakistan and cause crippling droughts, and because it could release the water in massive floods traveling downstream. 80% of farms in Pakistan rely on waters governed by the treaty, and the nation has already suffered consecutive years of drought, meaning that a long-term cutoff of water could be crippling for Pakistan.
So how would they do that? Do they have dams upriver that they can have reservoirs that can be filled, that they can stop the flow and they can fill up those reservoirs? Or are they almost threatening to like redirect the river itself?
In the long term. So for India to suspend the treaty in the wake of the Pahalgam attack sent two very frightening signals all at once. The first indicated that India's assessment of the terror attack must have either showed conclusively that Pakistan was responsible, or, to take a cynical view here, it had decided to use the attack as pretext for a major escalation. And second, given the magnitude of the threshold that India just crossed, India most likely wants to make it clear that it will not be backing down. Pakistan issued its own series of retaliations in short order, closing its airspace to Indian airlines and giving a sharp condemnation of India's decision to suspend the water treaty. The nation suspended a very special visa category granted to Indians, with the exception of Sikh pilgrims, and suspended all trade with India, including trade deals and goods exchanged through third nations. Pakistan suspended its own historic treaty, the similar agreement signed in 1962, which establishes principles governing the carefully managed peace between the two nations, including a ceasefire in Kashmir. Pakistan accused India of, and we'll quote here, fomenting terrorism inside Pakistan, and stated it would consider all bilateral agreements and treaties with India to be suspended until India ended its alleged sponsorship of terrorism.
Like a false flag, they're fomenting terrorism in Pakistan against India, or fomenting terrorism in Pakistan against Pakistan?
Perhaps most importantly,
am I not listening right? I'm sorry.
Till India ended its alleged sponsorship of terrorism. Perhaps most important of all, going back to the Indus Waters Treaty, Pakistan vowed to consider any attempt to stop or divert water allotted for Pakistan as an act of war, one that would draw full military retaliation from Pakistan. Then, the provocation started. Overnight on the 24th, troops of both nations exchanged fire overnight across the mutually agreed line of control, particularly in an area called the Lipa Valley. The shooting continued on the next night, and on the next, with soldiers using small arms to fire into each other's vicinity in a growing number of locations. By the night of the 26th, Pakistan had deployed self-propelled artillery, and the skirmishers shown no signs of stopping. The Indian aircraft carrier INS Vikrant was dispatched to the Arabian Sea, while its latest guided missile destroyer, the Surat, conducted a live-fire missile interception and shot down a sea-skimming target in a signal of India's military readiness. Ongoing exercises by the Indian Air Force have intensified, and military assets have begun moving rapidly across the country. In India, in Pakistan, and among the diaspora of both nationalities worldwide, protests began around diplomatic locations, with protesters supporting each nation clashing abroad at times. Meanwhile, in India-controlled Kashmir, Indian security forces cracked down on suspected terrorists, with skirmishes breaking out that have left several soldiers and several militants dead so far. In the process,
It's so strange seeing I get that it comes with the territory of being a nation of immigrants, but again, there's this part of me that when I see this sort of it's like, are you a part of this country or aren't you? You know, like, do you care more about the fates of Pakistan and India than you do the UK, for instance? Am I wrong to think this? Is it just natural to, do you know what I mean? Am I wrong to think that? I could be, but it's almost like when I see this, it's like, wait, you're British, you're not Pakistani, you're not Indian. It would be like me Well, if you're like a first generation immigrant, I can see you having that, and it's freedom of speech and everything. But there's also this part of me that's like, what are you doing here? You know, am I wrong? Tell me if I'm wrong, please.
In India-controlled Kashmir, Indian security forces cracked down on suspected terrorists, with skirmishes breaking out that have left several soldiers and several militants dead so far. In the process, security forces destroyed the homes of people suspected of being involved with the attack. Finally, India demonstrated that it was willing to meddle with the rivers governed by the Indus Waters Treaty. Although India cannot immediately cut off the flow of water because it's only allowed by treaty to build installations that can't dam those rivers, it released much of the water that it can store on a river called the Jhelum. According to the Times of India, water was released from a dam without notice after heavy rain, sending floodwaters downstream to Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. Residents were able to evacuate, and Pakistan appears not to have interpreted that threat as the act of war that it warned against, but it may only be a glimpse of what's to come. In the short term, monsoon season is coming, and Pakistan would be powerless to stop a rush of
I'm sure maybe I'm kind of thinking back on my statement. I'm sure like in the 1800s where you had like German immigrants and Irish immigrants, that if there are problems overseas, then they would probably protest for their country. So maybe I was wrong to think that way, but I don't know. I'm curious to hear your opinions.
Surplus water. Monsoon season is coming, and Pakistan would be powerless to stop a rush of surplus water into the nation unannounced. India could divert water to its own canals in just a matter of months, choking off the supply to Pakistan in the short term, while large-scale dams could take anywhere from a couple of years to the better part of a decade to finish. India has indicated that it will not share flood warnings with Pakistan in the future, and it'll withhold any information from Pakistan that would indicate how much water is coming downstream or when it'll arrive. Now, at the time of writing, India and Pakistan have not entered a large-scale conflict, but according to most expert observers in the region, a harsh retaliation by India seems to be an inevitability. In fact, reporting by the New York Times suggests that Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi is working overtime to explain its justifications for a strike on Pakistan to the international community. Per the Times, Modi has received and spoken with over 100 representatives of other nations, and according to diplomatic sources, he's working to secure either approval or at least a tacit agreement not to get in the way from the officials that he's meeting with. Publicly, Modi has vowed severe retaliation and threatened to destroy areas that militants in Kashmir rely on for safe haven. Modi's harsh response has been well received domestically, with much of India outraged over the deliberate targeting of Hindu civilians in the terror attack in Pahalgam. For years, Modi's political movement has drawn on the power of Hindu nationalism in the world's most populous nation, and now anti-Muslim sentiment in India is rising rapidly. Abroad, few nations have the type of meaningful leverage over Modi that could prevent India's leader from escalating if he so chooses, and those nations that could put a stop to what's happening don't appear inclined to do that. As for what comes next, past action may help to predict future conflict.
See, if there was this same scenario over North and South Korea, I feel like the international intervention would be so much more prioritized. Why is it that when it comes to Pakistan and India in the terms of nuclear threats, does it not seem as front pageist? I'm making a new term. You know, it's so weird. You have two giant, I mean, India is way, you could take away the population of Pakistan entirely from India's population, and India would still have well over 1 billion people. But Pakistan still has, I believe, over 200 million people. These are giant nations, both nuclear armed nations with decades-long conflicts with each other. And yet it seems like they're not, like, this should be front page news even over stuff in Israel or in Sudan or in even Ukraine. and yet I don't hear that much about it, you know?
India and Pakistan have fought several wars since the partition of India in 1947 with varying results. Their first war, fought over Kashmir in 1947 and 1948, ended with a stalemate that sometimes interpreted as a partial victory for India establishing the line of control in Kashmir that still governs affairs to this day. In 1965, India got the better of a 6-week-long war, while in 1971, India was able to beat back an initial Pakistani assault and force the surrender of over 90,000 Pakistani troops. In a more limited engagement, the Kargil War of 1999, Pakistan provoked a war that was quickly drawn down due to international pressure in yet another defeat for the Pakistani military. Other engagements since that time have consisted of smaller skirmishes before a rather hurried return to the status quo. The good news to take away from that quick history is that these two nuclear-armed nations have proven adept at avoiding a nuclear exchange so far. Pakistan gained the ability to detonate a nuclear weapon around 1984. India tested its first weapon a decade earlier, and today each side possesses an arsenal at or above 170 warheads. Neither side has yet launched a nuclear weapon in anger, and for now, the current conflict doesn't outwardly seem to be on track for a nuclear exchange. So that's something to count on at a moment where good news in this crisis is pretty hard to come by. But both in terms of their nuclear and their conventional weapons, the most important factor that may differentiate this conflict from prior exchanges for India and Pakistan is the degree to which their respective militaries have evolved. Pakistan has acquired hundreds of modern main battle tanks, quite a bit of heavy artillery, and advanced Chinese fighter aircraft since the turn of the 21st century. India, meanwhile, has rapidly modernized its military over the last several years, fielding an aircraft carrier, new top-of-the-line combat jets, and a small but significant number of other advanced pieces of military hardware, along with a high volume of older weapons and vehicles. Notably, both sides have enhanced their delivery mechanisms for nuclear weapons, meaning that if either side does choose to escalate toward a nuclear exchange, then each side will need to treat the other's capabilities with immense care in order to avoid provoking a first strike.
Given the populations of the two countries and the density, I believe that Mumbai is the biggest population center closest to Pakistan. I'm not sure if that's the case, but also, yeah, Pakistan, tons of people. A nuclear exchange would probably be one of the most deadly occurrences in mankind or in human history.
It is not likely that a nuclear exchange will happen over the course of this conflict, but we are talking about a direct confrontation between two nuclear-armed nations. An exchange simply cannot be ruled out completely. As for what happens next, that choice appears to be in India's hands for now. The nation has largely ignored calls by other countries and international organizations, including the UN, to de-escalate, and Modi's preparations over the last few days would indicate that he and his inner circle do intend to begin at least a limited exchange. But how far India will go, nobody except Modi himself knows. Critically, India does have a precedent for responding to attacks like these. In 2016, an attack killed 19 Indian soldiers, and in retaliation, India launched targeted airstrikes on militant targets on the Pakistani side of the Kashmir line of control. In 2019, at least 40 Indian paramilitaries were killed, and again, India's response came by way of airstrikes, although on that occasion, Indian and Pakistani pilots got into a dogfight over the region. Although a wider war was averted in both instances, and that is a reason for limited optimism, the precedent also makes it difficult for India not to launch airstrikes, this time as a bare minimum. Both the targeting of civilians this time around and the scale and scope of India's response thus far suggest that the response will be considerably larger. Among the non-nuclear options available to India, if the nation is interested in a resolution that does not start a full-scale war, is the possibility of a covert operation inside Pakistan or Pakistani Kashmir. Those could target known militant bases or other concentrations of Lashkar-e-Taiba fighters or assets, or it could target the Pakistani military or its intelligence services, depending on the message that India wants to send and the intended severity of that message when it arrives. Alternately, India could engage in cross-border shelling, targeting either uninhabited areas for purely symbolic purposes or targets associated to either non-state militants or the military proper. Finally, it could engage in wider airstrikes, either with aircraft or cruise missiles, but counterweight a higher volume of strikes or the selection of higher-powered munitions by targeting irrelevant or minimally important locations. Or India can launch an attack attack that will lead to wider conflict, demonstrating its willingness to challenge Pakistan directly.
I think the response would depend. It was mentioned briefly, but on the Pakistani response to the terror attack, right? I doubt that it was a state-ordered Pakistani terrorist attack. I'm sure it was a group of Pakistanis that went into India and carried it out, right? And I understand, as I mentioned earlier, the dichotomy, or am I using that right? The overarching relationship of India and Pakistan, right? And that saying you're wrong or calling this out as wrong as you should could have some diplomatic pain to you as Pakistan. But if Pakistan doesn't call that out as something horrible and that shouldn't happen, then India is more likely to have a bigger strike, which could go into a larger war,
and
right?
Then leaving it up to Pakistan to either back down or retaliate in kind. The problem with even limited strikes, however, is that they can very easily be misinterpreted or received by Pakistan in a way that India doesn't anticipate. Depending on what India does and how Pakistan reacts, there's no telling whether even a carefully calibrated and symbolic attack could lead to a much larger exchange. Indeed, there's no telling that Pakistan will even wait for India to act first. With India seeming to be on the warpath, Pakistan may choose to act first and gain an advantage if the nation's leaders believe that a more significant conflict is in store. It's the same dynamic that we've seen play out within just the last year between Israel and Iran. Strikes can be carefully prepared to send a specific message, but there are no guarantees that the message will be received as intended. There is, however, room for de-escalation on both sides. Pakistan has the option to institute its own crackdowns in Kashmir, identifying and prosecuting militants or potentially even cooperating with India in its investigations. To be clear, that's not likely to happen, but it is an option. Pakistan can appeal to either the United States or China to help mediate the situation, or it can decline to strike back in the event that India attacks, although
I'm sure India wouldn't like China to mediate this situation between Pakistan and India when India and China themselves have their own territorial disputes in the Himalayas. So,
decision, or it can decline to strike back.
Not to say America would be a great option either.
United States or China to help mediate the situation, or it can decline to strike back in the event that India attacks, although that decision would come with political costs back home. India could opt for a long-term retaliation rather than a short-term strike, deciding instead to manipulate the waters of the Kashmir region, build dams over the next few years, and pressure Pakistan that way. Or it could even make limited moves in pursuit of that course before letting the crisis calm down naturally with time and making a graceful exit from this cycle of escalation.
Well, threatening to cut off the water to Pakistan could be more of a provocation than just militarily striking and killing Pakistanis. Because, like it said earlier, 80% of Pakistan's, I think, farmland production comes from the Indus, right? And so threatening that is like threatening millions of Pakistanis, whereas a direct attack is threatening tens of Pakistanis.
Unfortunately, the more likely scenario is that de-escalation talk is wishful thinking. If the reports on India's diplomatic efforts are accurate, then the nation may strike Pakistan within days, it may strike within hours, or by the time you're watching this,
maybe already.
Strike might already happened. All indicators are that India intends to treat this situation with grave seriousness, and its decision to take retaliatory steps that New Delhi has stayed away from for decades would suggest that this time is different. How bad it gets, how Pakistan reacts, and how many lives are ultimately lost, we're only going to find out with time. Thank you for watching.
Thank you for making. It's a great video. I'd appreciate any comments down below, guys. If I said something you disagree with, please let me know. Argue against me. Any answers to questions, any comments at all, I appreciate it, guys. You're always awesome in the comments. Now, I do, obviously the big elephant in the room is religious conflict. And I think the more I think about it, I think that religion is sometimes an excuse for cultural difference. I mean, I don't know how I can say it's an excuse for cultural division when the cultural division is about religion. And so, like, a lot of people like to say, like, and I used to believe this back in my late teens, very early 20s, that religion, if religion was not a thing, there'd be so much more peace in the world. The more I've grown older, I believe that's not the case. And I believe religion is just the means for people fighting. You know, I think different cultures fight. They see the other culture as often a threat to them. And religion over the last millennia, forever in human history, has kind of just been the main cultural difference. So let me know. Okay, guys, disagree? Let me know. Hope everyone's doing well, guys. And hopefully I'll see you guys next video. We'll keep on learning together. Bye, guys.